What's up, Rockstars? Today I'm going to be telling you about another canceled game that was completely funded several times over. Very successful. Looks like it hit a minimum viable product when it comes to how much it's ordering, and yet it's still canceled. We're going to be discussing this issue at large, not just this particular case, but we'll go over this particular case as well. What you can do, why devs do this, let's discuss. Alright, so I'm going to start by describing what happened. I'm then going to go over why devs do this, and then I'm going to talk about what we can do as consumers when we see something that might be like this or we think is like this. Alright, so they're going to kind of explain the situation themselves, so I'm going to go ahead and start. This is Midhala. It says a low-luck co-op dungeon crawl board game. That title has changed. We'll talk about that in a moment. As you can see, it made $102,000 and made over 1,000 backers pledge for it. So definitely on the right track. Often when you make games over in China, you have a certain run, a minimum print run that you have to do. And the lowest I've ever seen that is 1,000. Often it's actually more than that. And often you need more than that because there's a few more backers because you need replacement parts, stuff like that to send out to people. So 1,000 plus is definitely something that is technically doable even in a mass market thing like China, nonetheless other production things. But let's go ahead and discuss this. Of Life and Death, it's update number 20. So it says here that I've backed many campaigns myself, and the usual pattern is, and what he's talking about is the usual pattern is where you get a large amount of funding the first 2 days, and then it kind of trickles down and makes this U shape, and you're only gaining a little bit, and then it goes back up in the last 2 days because Kickstarter has a 48-hour remind me later thing where people can click that and then come back at the end. A lot of people do that because they like backing when they can't wait any longer, and because then they see everything that came out of the stretch goals, all the add-ons, the final price, where that campaign ended up, and they much prefer to back at that time. So typically you get kind of an up there. Now, I'm going to kind of dispel this a little bit, but first let's go ahead and talk about this. So what he said here is, here it is currently the exact opposite way. So as you can see here on KickTrack, you can see that their curve was not the same, right? They had the first 2 days like normal, and they even had a fairly good third day, but then after that, they started dropping money. Now, not a whole lot, but definitely not gaining any either, right? And then there was never even an uptick at the end. In fact, it started dumping it even more towards the end. Now, there's a few reasons I think this was the case. So since we're talking about this campaign right now, again, we'll talk about why they did a low funding goal, why that was a lie, why they say it was, they were lying about it, and what we can do about it in just a moment. For this, I'll say that I think there's a misunderstanding here. While the normal curve is that, but only because of two things. Either a very short campaign, so the U part, the part in the middle between the two big parts is very, very short, or because they add add-ons that people can increase their pledge with. And in fact, even in the last two, one of the reasons it gained so much isn't necessarily just new backers, but it's because a lot of people take that time to finally upgrade now that they see all the add-ons and what is available, what's not, and all the different cosmetics or whatever it is they can purchase. They up their pledge that way. Often companies will introduce an all-in at a savings and people upgrade for that reason also. So there's that as well. Just everybody's looking at the end and putting their final amounts in it. Often that's higher because there's more available to buy, not just because there's more backers. So if you look here, it was a very long campaign. In fact, 31 days before they canceled it. That is an extremely long time. And unless you have all the content to be able to excite people and have the backers you do have continue to gain money to offset the people that will naturally drop over the course of a campaign, often more than are gaining, not always, but often, then you're going to see that negative. And that's actually very normal. If you see a month-long campaign and there's not a whole lot of add-ons to be able to do and stuff like that, you will see this negative trickle almost all the time. That's actually pretty normal. Now, often you'll still see an uptick on the back, but that trend of negativity can continue as people leave, as people wonder, why are people leaving? Are they seeing something I'm not seeing? So I think there's some confusion there. Yes, normally it's a U-shape, but not because of how they ran their campaign, about how most campaigns are run. Again, either they're about 2 weeks long, if they don't have a whole lot to kind of inflate in the middle, or it's a little bit longer, but they have a whole lot of various add-ons and stuff that people can continue to increase their pledge with. So moving back onto this. It says here, I've tried to address this through multiple different things, and they definitely did. In fact, when I covered this first, as you can see, it was called 100% skill-based co-op dungeon crawl board game, and now it's called low luck co-op dungeon crawl board game. So they definitely were working on the campaign. And if you appreciate the fact that I actually shared this Midhala for 3 different times during its campaign, because I'm constantly talking about games and telling you what games are available and stuff like that. you can go ahead and subscribe. I know most of you, about half of you actually, are not subscribed. So feel free to click that subscribe button. I keep you guys informed, of course. But yeah, either way, they were definitely working on this over time and changing things, trying to make whatever they felt like, okay, this is not connecting with other people. How can we fix that? So they were doing some changes there. Now, Midhala has been a passion project for 3 long years now. I don't think people realize how difficult it is to create something. I recently discovered or saw this happen where somebody I know and I've been helping with is creating a YouTube channel and making content now. And they've been asking me all sorts of questions, and they've been commenting about how much time it takes and the work it takes. And you think like, oh, you just upload, it's fine. And it's like, no, actually it's a lot of work. And I think every job is like that. The job you have is probably like that. If you told people, and some people might be like, oh, that doesn't sound like it's too hard. And you're like, dude, you have no idea. There is so much work to do. Some of you guys are lucky with a good, easy, chill job, but for a lot of times, that's the case. When I worked at HP, I worked on their LaserJet printers. And I remember my father saying, well, how do they have so many people working on printers? It's a printer, right? Well, there's a lot to go on there, right? And I did conformance testing. It doesn't matter. Anyway, the point is that like, there's a lot of work that goes on when it comes to creating something. And most people are just consumers in most of their aspects. Sometimes they might be creative in one part, but it takes a lot of effort. And if you do make the jump from consumer to creator, you often do see that. So I totally believe that. It says a lot of blood, sweat, and money have gone into this project. It's very interesting. He talks about money. We'll talk about that a little bit more. In fact, what he says here is that he spent a ton of savings on this. Now, there's definitely the case where some people just have a lot more spare money than others and can do stuff like this. I'll talk more about that in a moment. So let's go ahead and skip that and go down to here. So while 100,000 seems like a lot of money, this project would still not break even, and that is not even counting my previous investments. In case you noticed or didn't notice, the goal was 21,307. The reason it's a weird number is because it's converted. So it was 19,750 for the goal, right? Which obviously is not the case. Some may now ask at this point, why the funding goal was around 20,000? Why would you say that if you needed more than 100,000? Those of you who have done marketing for Kickstarter campaigns or are experienced backers will likely know that this number is really mostly a marketing number without any merit on most Kickstarters, as backers have been shown to avoid projects openly showing high funding goals. I'm going to have a few comments on that, but just know that the rest of it is essentially like, hey, I'm going to try and do what I can. I will link down to this below. This is their website, and they do have a sign up. So if you want to see the future of Midhala, if it looks interesting, if you want to support an indie developer, that is linked down below. Go ahead and feel free to check that out. Just know that if you see a number from him, it might not be totally accurate, right? I mean, that's obvious now. So going back to this, I want to break this part down a little bit. Just to say that I wouldn't necessarily say it like this, and maybe old me would have, but I've definitely, I think, matured on this platform and my space in here a little bit more to say that you got to be cautious when talking about your peers. His peers would be other creators, other developers. And what he's saying here is that most Kickstarters, that is a marketing number without merit. I would say there are definitely some. I couldn't necessarily say there are most, and there's a reason I can't say most. First of all, I haven't run the numbers. Second of all, because of what I'm about to kind of inform you on why this is done, right? He's saying essentially, hey, this is a low on purpose. It's low specifically because it's a marketing thing. Backers avoid high ones. Now, I think that's partially true, and I'll talk about that as well, but I think he's looking at it in an inverse way. So, first of all, just know that if you're watching this video, you're not part of what I'm talking about here. You guys are definitely a minority. We all are a minority here. We're on YouTube watching industry news and stuff like this, really caring about things and discussing things with each other in a very detailed way. Most consumers are casual consumers in every industry out there. That's just how it is, right? Unless it's like super early adopter technology stuff. Often the people that are just buying the product, just buy the product. And you're like that. I'm like that. We're all like that in a lot of things, right? We don't know the ins and outs of every single company and every single option and everything that we buy and consume. That would literally be impossible. There's not enough time in the day. So we have our certain passions, in this case, probably board games. I imagine we all share that. But the average backer is not that. So just know that while you might see this as different, they don't necessarily see it as different, right? So you can see the signs, you can tell, and I'll talk about what you can do with that information. Whereas most backers are just see a cool game, they want a cool game, looks like a neat price for it, fine, I'll back. And that's it. That's all there is to it. They won't read updates, they don't read comments, they just peace out. Many backers of Midhala probably don't even know it's canceled because they may not even monitor the email that Kickstarter is attributed to. There are many times where I get comments from people like, thank you for letting me know, I didn't know, and I'm covering an update that they backed, because it just gets lost in the shuffle. Even you get a ton of emails, if nothing else, right? So it happens. So anyway, just know that we're exempt from a lot of what I want to say. So everyone, I think, wants to be part of a resounding success, right? When they say right here that the backers are shown to avoid projects only showing high funding goals, that is not actually true. I can point to several that disprove that. Now, the reason I'm not going to, and I'm actually probably going to go ahead and just stop the screen sharing right now, because we're just going to have a conversation about this at this point. Anyway, the reason is because people want to be part of something super successful, right? Highly successful. You don't want to be part of something that's barely possible. I mean, there are people that do, and again, we are the exception. So if you're feeling that way, know that you are not the casual backer. Most people in general, just without even thinking overtly, want to be part of something that's just super awesome and everybody's excited about. It's why gatherings of people happen. It's why FOMO exists, because you feel like you're going to miss out because other people are excited about something. And obviously there's a lot of buzz and excitement over this thing, and you're afraid you're not going to be part of that excitement. It naturally does that. That's just something it does. And I think that's super interesting that that's the case. It's just naturally a human endeavor, I think. And so even let's say it's the same thing. It's funded $350,000. And if the funding goal was $325,000, it was a success. Often that means it doesn't fund until the very last day, so it's unfunded for a long time, or it is, but then it barely is. Either way, people are like, this is barely making it. I don't know if I feel comfortable with that. And in a lot of ways, ignorance is bliss, right? But if nothing else, there's constant discussion that's kind of negative. Why isn't it doing better? How could it do better? All this stuff. If instead you make the funding goal $20,000 and you fund $350,000, you funded the same. It's actually the exact same instance. However, now it's excitement. Look how many people are excited. Look how quickly we funded. Look at this. Look at that. It's so amazing. That's what they're talking about when it comes to the marketing. But it's not so much marketing as in they just avoid a big number. They avoid something that's not an instant and big success, regardless of the number. There have been several, especially big name companies, that will launch something with a fairly realistic price in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they still fund like that, and they fund huge, and it's a big success, and that's totally fine. It's not the number, it's the whether or not it's a big success or not over that number, regardless of what that number is. It can be truthful. You just have to be able to fund it very quickly. Otherwise, people do get a little cagey. Now, I will also say that campaigns are just super complex, right? So when it comes to the actual dollar value and why you can't just automatically see a low funding goal and assume that means it's fake, right? So you're trying to look at it and you're like, a 20,000, there's no way they can do it on 20,000. Well, not necessarily. I mean, first of all, not all campaigns are created equal. Some are much cheaper to make than others. For instance, a lot of Euro games are actually a lot cheaper than Ameritrash games because they do things where like, this is a proxy for this, or it's just a generic cube that I get from the game development, production house in China, the factory, and they make these out. There's not custom for me or anything like that. It's super easy to do. There's a lot of that kind of thing. Or if nothing else, the amount of art. Take the game of Blood Rage, right? Most people know what Blood Rage is. If you don't, it's essentially a little area control game. It goes through 3 acts and then you're done. The amount of art that they need for that, the amount of development that they need for that, and the mechanics that play there versus something like, let's say, Madara or Alien Trespass Odyssey or Kingdom Death Monster or something like that, where you have thousands of unique pieces of arts and all of these items and all of these different monsters that are designed and everything needs to be tried against each other and all that. And the development time and the cost and R&D cost of getting those up and producing those is so fundamentally different. It's not even funny. It's a huge amount, a huge difference. Right? So when you get these games that have thousands of items and each one is a unique piece of art, that obviously just costs more in so many different ways. Not just a raw dollar, but just a development time, improving those and tweaking them and all that stuff compared to something that is a little bit cheaper. So not all games are equal, right? Some are just cheaper to make than others. Additionally, you can really change how you structure the campaign, how many SKUs you have for the picking and packing and the logistics of shipping those out, how many pledges you have and different options there. All of this stuff you can do to make it a cheaper entry than maybe what looks to be an apples to apples comparison. And this is why you can't really compare campaigns. There's a lot going on that maybe you, even as a consumer or even as an interested consumer, don't have line of sight to. None of us do, because we know the inner workings of the company and how they're doing that. Maybe they have a whole bunch of employees. It's a big group of friends that started this. Maybe it's one guy, right? Who knows? We're not sure. And so on top of that, personal money. He kind of mentioned he was working off of like his savings, and that's what he was doing to kind of make this game possible and really get it over the finish line for at least enough for the Kickstarter, he thought. Not everybody has that, right? There are people who can't put any money into it, and there are just wealthy people out there. Everybody's at a different spot when it comes to money, and some people just have it. And if they need to sell some assets, that's fine. If they want to make a board game and produce it at a loss, they can totally do that. That's their pet project. They have enough money. They're retired. They're great off. Their dad made a lot of money, so they were born into it. Who knows? It doesn't matter. Regardless, they can sell some assets or something. They can produce a game, even if it's at a loss. It's their passion project. A lot of companies, and I've been told this from companies, feel that you often, and this is not true, I've known companies that have done otherwise, that you don't ever make money on your first game. And in fact, often you don't ever make money on your second game. In other words, you're operating at a loss. So you're going into this and you know you didn't make enough, but unlike your personal account, businesses can actually operate at a loss because they have other means of generating revenue and stuff like that. So often, maybe we lost a little bit there, but we ordered a big amount and now we can do a reprint campaign and deliver it really quick. Or maybe we can sell these at conventions, because you would be amazed at the amount of games sold at Gen Con. Insane. If you're not busy stealing Magic the Gathering cards, you're buying a whole lot of Magic the Gathering cards or other games. It's impressive how much you can churn through just by attending Gen Con, even in an unofficial way, but definitely if you have a booth. So there's all sorts of different things you can do there, whether it's your personal money that's outside of that. There's just a plethora of ways to adjust that number. Maybe you're helping out with shipping versus not helping out with shipping. Maybe you're including freight or not including freight, right? That's a probably different discussion there. But is this fair? Should they have to tell you these things? All of these things are something that's definitely important to you, right? You're asking this question like, hey, $20,000, can you actually produce on $20,000? Maybe it's yes, maybe it's not. I actually just unboxed a game that I'm going to show you guys here real soon. So subscribe if you want to see that. Different than any other game I've ever covered because it was not made in China. It was not mass marketable at all. It only had a few hundred people that wanted the game, a few hundred people that bought it, and yet this guy has done like 20 plus campaigns doing this for his small following of people that really dig his games. Because you can do that. You can do it to order. You can print locally. You can 3D print. You can COcast. You can do all sorts of stuff besides go to China, produce thousands of copies, and deliver it across the world that way. You can ship out of your garage. It is possible. For a lot of people, including what I think Midhala was like, is if I cannot make it in China and ship it everywhere, I'm not going to do it at all. And I guess want to say that there are other ways of doing it, and they might have plans on how to do that. There was a campaign. Again, I'm not going to point to anything else. I don't want to associate anything else in a bad way or anything like that. But there was another campaign, had a low cost, and one of my patrons, a low funding level, actually asked them about it. And for the first time ever that I have seen, they responded with minimum amounts that they needed, copies, and who their manufacturer was, why they swapped manufacturers, what the original manufacturer was. Essentially, they didn't quite tell us the exact quoted amount, but they said that's what it's based off of. And that is so, plus their personal money. They said, hey, I got a good job. My spouse has a good job. We can support this. You don't normally get that. Normally they don't tell you anything. Now, is that fair? Not necessarily, but also, I mean, we're not investors. Investors definitely are more financially involved than just buying a product, right? They are very financially involved. To them, this is their business. And so they have certain rights where they can see books and, honesty needs to be there and stuff like that too. We have rights as consumers, depending on where we live, some more than others. But at the end of the day, they don't need to tell you how much is in their savings account, right? They can just say, don't worry, I'll cover it. And you have to choose to believe it or not. So, what can we do about it? That's why they do it, right? They do it because it makes it look like an instant success, and often that can lead to it. Because if nothing else, the one that barely survives, the one that barely ekes by, after a while, right, unless they deliver real quick during that pledge manager time or whatever, they will be the first targeted for refunds. Hey, you need some money real quick. Your car broke down. Hey, you need some money real quick. This new shiny game looks way cooler. I want that. I've lost interest in this old game that hasn't delivered yet. You're going to ask for the refund on that one before the other ones because it looked kind of cagey anyway. So it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. Unless you are that blow-away success, you're just going to have a hard time throughout until you finally deliver or at least stop giving refunds. So how can we, not necessarily solve this, but deal with it as consumers? Well, first of all, we can ask questions. Like I said, one of my patrons totally asked a question and they can either answer or not, and you can judge based off their answer if you're happy with that answer or not, right? But definitely ask, put it out there. Hey, I see this funding goal is really low. What do you have to say for that? If there's no answer, then you definitely have an answer in that, right? So just feel free to ask, and maybe they'll share, maybe they won't. Either way, you'll have some more information, even if they say nothing, to judge whether you continue or not. Look at their history. So often there are reprints where they were already canceled once and they're coming again, and you can see maybe often they'll update the old one saying, I've made these changes, but when they launch it, they don't propagate that news forward. It's not like, this is the changes from the old campaign you may not even be aware of, right? There's like, here's a new campaign. So often checking the old one can either see some history of the company, can see if they've delivered other things to other backers, if they're happy with it, can see that kind of success, can see maybe changes they've done or talked through on that old campaign compared, or if nothing else, see what difference you might be able to notice yourself. Oh, hey, oh, that's right. They took out that expansion now, so they're producing less, or now it's standees versus minis, or whatever it might be. So you can definitely check history. Also, you can just go into things knowing it's more risky. If you see a low number, if nothing else, you know, okay, well, maybe they're honest about this. Maybe they're not. I don't know. So it's kind of hard to tell, right? Maybe it's some rich guy and he's going to make it anyway. And it doesn't matter if it funds or not. He just wanted people to be able to buy it and didn't want to launch a storefront for it, kind of thing. So, I mean, that's always possible. Just if you go into it knowing if it delivers, fine. If not, I tried to help an indie out. I'm cool with that. You can go through it a lot better because the worst they can do is meet your expectations, right? The best they can do is obviously surpass it. So that's kind of that one thing you do. Also, if you have information, if you feel like there is a better risk, you can warn others. Like I said, we here are kind of an exception to a lot of groups that just casually consume. And sometimes, especially when they first are looking to back something, at that point, they're actually looking at it. Often they'll never visit the campaign again, but they might look at comments. Or if somebody's asking a question, you can inform them, hey, just as an FYI, I wouldn't, bet on getting an answer. We asked this question last campaign. They didn't answer, whatever it might be. Either way, you can tell others about it. Now, often when you do that, lately, this has been a big trend lately where the developer will actually delete your comment or try and delete your comment, mark it as spam or whatever, and Kickstarter auto hides it for a time until they say it's okay. And because they think you're being a disingenuine backer. If that ever happens, if you feel like you can't get your voice out because they're hiding it, reach out to me. Let me know, whether it's in a comment, whether it's an email, Discord, whatever, wherever you can find me, go ahead and let me know and I'll see what I can do about that. But that's really all we can do. We can, worst case scenario, go into it knowing it's a risk because we don't know all the variables to it. Often, yeah, it's marketing. That definitely happens. Is it the majority of the time? I'm hesitant to say that. I think a lot of times there's various ways businesses can operate even at a loss and still be successful. It is technically possible. A lot of it depends on the person running the boat, right? And what they're willing to do and how they're willing to handle it more than anything. Really, the big trial of a campaign isn't getting that funding. It's what they do with the money right afterwards. Often they get this big amount of money and they start hiring everybody and get a whole bunch of artists and get a nice office and everybody's in office and doing all that stuff. And you got company lunches or whatever it is. They spend it all super quick, not realizing, oh, we need this to last like 2 years until we deliver. So anyway, that's, I guess, my thoughts on that. Let me know your thoughts. I know it's frustrating to see. I suppose it's always better to cancel than it is to write it out and then to say no. So if you don't think you're going to be able to do it, don't take people's money. 100%. Unless you have a very good game plan and you definitely know what you're doing, by all means do that. Now, whether they should share that or not, I mean, that's debatable. I personally think they should share a lot more. I would personally share a lot more, but I can understand why they necessarily wouldn't, because at the end of the day, we're consumers, not creators, and it's hard to know what being a creator is like and the thrash that can evolve. A quick example before I let you go. Valve is a software development company. They started making video games like Half-Life, Counter-Strike. You may have heard of some of those. Eventually made Steam a digital platform to release games on, and now that's mostly what they do. But they did a lot of that, and a few others, Dota and whatnot. So they made Half-Life and Half-Life 2, and people loved those, and they were waiting for Half-Life 3, and we're still waiting for Half-Life 3. And the reason that's the case is because they actually keep starting work on it, but then for whatever reason, they're not happy with the path it goes, and so they scrap it, and then maybe they try something else, and that didn't work. But you know what? When we had this other piece here would have been great, so maybe we combine that, and maybe we spin it off in this direction, and maybe we start up again and start off again and stuff like that. And that kind of thrash that happens in a creative space. I even do that with my thumbnails, right? I mean, like, anytime you're creating anything, it's often a very messy process with a lot of back and forth. That will drive backers crazy. There's just not enough understanding of the process of creating something like as complex as a board game among us. Again, we're the exception. I'm talking to normal people to really understand you just scrapped that whole idea, huh? So they wait until it's guaranteed yes, and then they'll say something. So there'll be a lot of stuff behind that veil. And for a large part, again, that ignorance is kind of bliss, especially if they tell you something you can't understand. It's very limited in how helpful that is to you. If that all it can do is kind of confuse you and maybe lead you to think something that's not true. So it's almost better to hold that closer to your chest. I'm not saying that's what they should do. I'm just saying I can understand that thought process. I totally can. So it is kind of debatable in my head. I can understand why they wouldn't. I do wish they would, because I think would understand a little bit more than perhaps some others, and definitely that would help me out. So at least on a selfish kind of personal level, that's how I feel about it. Let me know your thoughts, though. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, if you know any campaign that's kind of like this, or there's a low funding goal and you're not sure if it's going to actually fund, or if it does fund, if that's a legitimate goal or not, or if they're launching other stuff, or if you have any more information around the board game creation space, I would love to hear your thoughts. Again, let me know in the comments below. And stay tuned. Again, subscribe to see that unboxing. It's going to be a super cool game. Nobody else is showing it off because nobody else got it. It's a super rare game. I actually was only able to buy that thanks to my patrons. I actually asked you guys, do you want me to buy that game or not? Because it's not going to make its money in ad revenue, because not enough people are going to watch it. But it's interesting for those of us that are interested in this kind of space to see something so different. Either way, stay tuned for that. I'll have another news video for you. It'll be a positive news video. That's coming up real soon, like tomorrow. So stay tuned for that, depending on when you watch this. If you didn't see this live, again, subscribe. Guys, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye, guys.